So last week, at least, the demos that I've run through, we had set up a target node on in AWS using Terraform. And that is going to be, well, that is generally the best practice because while you can use your local machine to act as a control node to set up playbooks on different target machines in a real world environment when you're working on a team, it makes more sense to have a dedicated Ansible control node, right? Because everybody will be using that same server as opposed to everyone just installing using Ansible running on their local machines, right? So having a dedicated control node will standardize the configurations of Ansible. It's for version control. It's to ensure that everyone's using the same inventory files, the same playbooks. So if something gets updated, everybody uses those same updates. Now, when we first set up an EC2 inside of AWS using Terraform, it doesn't have Ansible installed already, right? We've been manually SSHing into that EC2 to set up Ansible. What we can do instead of that is to have the playbooks we want all ready to go locally and use Ansible locally to also set up everything we need to get that control node up and running. So that could be as simple as just having Python, Ansible, and maybe even things like Git and Docker and SQL installed, right? That that will give you the ability to repeat this exact same setup for future control nodes. And in our case, because we really aren't going to be letting these EC2s persist because of costs, we're probably going to be setting up control nodes uh, and taking them down right after each exercise. So this is just a good directory to have locally, right? Like a directory that will contain all of your inventory files and playbooks. And we'll see today how we can just push that up into the control node that we spin up. What else? Let's see. That means we'll also, because we're setting up multiple playbooks, we'll also walk through how to call multiple playbooks from a single playbook. And right, one of the playbooks we'll be installing will be a playbook that we write to set up GitHub or the Git CLI specifically, and to get your SSH key up there so that your control node can SSH into the target nodes. Okay, so that's today's new lesson. Um, and let's actually, yeah, let's zoom up a bit. I, I'm I wanted to provide this example here because you all already have configurations for setting up EC2s in Terraform. And we just talked about like setting up Python on um, a newly provisioned instance, right? Terraform does have ways for you to manage your resources and to do some initial setup. Here, we see that we're using user data, um, which actually behind the scenes uses Cloud Init, which is a part of the AWS provider to run some shell commands as soon as it is provisioned. So we can think of this as a very simple or rudimentary launch template, right? As soon as the EC2 spins up, it's going to run, it's going to print out the statement installing Python 3, and then it's going to run a package manager DNF to first update and then install Python 3 and Python 3 dash pip. Now, could we also use this to install Ansible? Yes, but it will install Ansible as the root user. So when we SSH onto the EC2 as our EC2 user, we're not going to have access to Ansible, which is a problem. Now, we can do additional finagling to run whatever bash commands are necessary to try and get um, the user permissions set up correctly for an EC2 user. So things like echoing the directory, the path to these configurations, these setup files, and getting that into the EC2 user configuration. But that's a lot of finagling. All of it is already built into Ansible. And if we look at how Ansible handles this, it's just so much easier. We go down to, if we go down to get some of these installs. Oh, I don't have the Docker command in here. Or I do actually. In this Docker command where we're calling Ansible and we're passing in variables like the EC2 user, that allows Ansible to know to install these for that user, right? And so it's just a lot less configuration on our end to get this running the way that we want it running. So that's why Ansible is the preferred tool of choice. Even the Terraform, the official Terraform developers say that things like the remote exec provisioner, which is their provisioner for running scripts on a resource, should be used as a last resort. It's not the most secure way to do things, and you're essentially, again, just running a lot of shell commands without guardrails in place, guardrails that could be implemented by, like, let's say the developers of Ansible who have implemented these guardrails in their tool so that it's all set up and ready to go for the end user. Okay, so with all of that said, we've provided this example anyway. We're going to use it. And if I go back to my terminal, I've already got this set up. I'm not gonna spin it down to spin it back up, but I'll just rerun the command anyway so we could see some outputs. All right, because we've also added these outputs in case you don't already have them or something similar, just for convenience. What they do is they output the public IP, the IP as a URL. So you could just copy that into your browser, and the SSH command. So you could just copy, paste that into your terminal. So if I do Terraform apply, it will output those values. Okay, why does it want to change this? It changed something. I don't want to change that. Oh, yeah, I did change something. That's fine. I will change that. I think I just adjusted the commands that run as soon as it instantiates, but I think that might also destroy. Well, if it destroys my node, we'll just rerun the playbooks to get the results up there. Okay, so that's going to do its thing. It'll spit out the IP address. What else? Do you all have Ansible set up locally, either in a virtual environment or in Docker?
I do.
Okay, cool, cool. All right, so we've got our outputs here, and I mean, I'm already on here, but let me just exit out and rerun the command as if, whoops, as if I hadn't run it before. So that'll SSH me back onto the EC2. And let's see, what do we want to do first? Okay, let's write out some playbooks. So if you don't already have a central location for your playbooks and inventory files, go ahead and make a directory specifically for them. So something like Ansible project or whatever.
Do you
Here,
want us following along right now, or is this just watch?
yeah, follow along because we're gonna write out some playbooks. Yeah, so however you have your stuff set up, just get to where you are writing your playbooks. Like we see here, I've got my Docker file at the root directory of where I have the Ansible projects directory. If we go into Ansible project, this is where I have inventory and playbooks. And if we go into playbooks, we're gonna, well, I already have this playbook, but we're gonna pretend we're making one from scratch and we're gonna call it, yeah, let's make a new, um, set up Ansible. Something like set up Ansible, okay. And I'm gonna move this over here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do in this playbook is we have to specify some metadata, right? So things like the name, we're going to say install Python 3 and Ansible on a remote control node. Next, we want to specify which hosts we want to do this on. Since I know we're saying all here, but we could specify just a single host in the command, or even just specify an inventory file with just a single host. Become will allow us to become the super user so that we can install things, run commands without being challenged. And now we could write some tasks. Let's start with one called installing. Oh, how to do that? Install Python 3 and pip. And because we're using, what is it called? Uh, AWS Amazon Linux 2023, the package manager we're using is DNF. And so we call a DNF command and we specify what we want to pass into DNF command. So Python 3 and Python 3-pip. And let's set the state to present. Okay. Next, let's do another task, and we'll call this one install Ansible using pip. And so this is going to be a pip command. We're going to use pip to install Ansible. Again, set the state to present. Okay, now let's add some logging, right? Because when we run the playbook, it doesn't necessarily give us a lot of information. So if we do something like name verify Ansible install, we could specify a command that we want to run. In this case, Ansible dash dash version that will return the version that we want. And we could register a variable to store this under. So we're just going to call this variable Ansible version. Now that we've registered a variable and assigned the Ansible version to it, or more specifically, the output of the Ansible version command, we can print that output. Let's name this task display Ansible version output. Let's use the Ansible dot built-in debug to print out a message. And we're just going to concatenate or interpolate the value of the Ansible version into a simple message. And if we want it to be a little more, I guess, specific about it, we could say Ansible version, colon, and then we'll show the Ansible version. Okay. So that will give us some clarity. Now let's also do, okay, yeah, let's stop there and let's see where we're at. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab, I'm gonna go up one directory. Yeah, Julio.
Julius, would you be able to provide the script for this? I was following along. I just want to make sure I didn't mistype something.
Sure. It's actually, it should be in the, yeah, it should be in the new lesson.
Oh, okay, got it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so yeah, everything that we do today should be in there. I might add something else, like we'll see how much time we have left in the end, because I do have some additional playbooks that I got ready locally that I didn't use. So we'll see how much time we have left. But for now, I wanna run this, okay, just so I could see if it's working. And I've already gotten my Docker Ansible container set up. So if I go run a Docker images, we'll see that I've got my image ready to go. And so my command is going to be Docker run. I'm going to do a dash dash rm. That way, as soon as this finishes, the container will self-destruct. It will dematerialize into nothing and free up some space on my machine. It's just a good practice for decluttering. And I'm going to use the -v command to mount some directories, right? So I'm going to use my present working directory. So wherever I call this command from, we will be mapping that path to the workspace inside of the container. And now we could pass in some environment variables as well. This environment variable is specifically um, for the Ansible command. So if I want to avoid things like strict host key checking, I could either um, set that as an environment variable that gets used when I run the command, or I could just pass it in the way that I'm doing now, right? So I'm going to set this to false. I'm not absolutely sure it's necessary. I think I was running into an issue earlier where it helped, but then I changed a few more things. So I don't know for sure if it's necessary, but I'm going to leave it in there for now, and we could try it without later on. And I'm mounting again, right? So I'm using the -v to mount again, and I'm going to take the contents of my SSH directory, and I'm going to mount it into the container. So again, like all this mounting right now, it's for the container. It's not for the node. It's not for the target host. And I'm going to toss it into an SSH directory. Now I could pass in the name of my image. So this is the image that we're going to be uh, running a container from, because again, images are like snapshots, right, inside of Docker, and containers are like the instantiations of them. And now I also want to pass in Zoom windows in the way. I want to pass in my playbook. So relative to where I am right now, I think I need my directory Ansible project. So Ansible underscore project / playbooks. That's where my playbooks are stored. And I'm going to call the set up Ansible.yaml. All right, so now that I've got my playbook, I've got, oh yeah, let me backtrack a bit. So far, we've added a bunch of parameters that we're actually sending into the Docker command, right? So like everything here belongs or is going to Docker. We're mounting in our container. We're specifying this environment variable for the container, right? Docker Ans is again, the image name that we're passing into the Docker command. And now we are finally specifying some values that had passed into the Ansible command itself. And if we look at how the Docker file is set up, this will make a little more sense. Okay. So in our Docker file, our entry point is Ansible-playbook, right? That means basically all of this is running Ansible playbook, right? That's why everything moving forward are the arguments that we would normally pass into Ansible playbook if we were like running that out of a virtual environment, for example, right? So that's why our very long command right now is the way that it is. And in addition to the playbook, we're going to want to pass in an inventory file. Or in this case, because we're really only targeting one host, we could just pass in the actual address or the IP of that host, as opposed to making an inventory file with a single IP. So if I go back to my window where I ran my Terraform output, I'm going to grab that IP address and I'm going to paste it in here where I would normally pass in an inventory file. And now I'm going to be using the -e argument again, but this time this option is going to Ansible playbook, not Docker. So now I can pass in some environment variables that Ansible playbook is going to be using. And that's going to be things like Ansible user to user. Actually, I don't even really need this right now because we're not using. Oh, wait, no, yes, I do. Because we want to run this on our target node. So, right, we're trying to access this server. So right now, that's actually our target node, right? Yeah, so we're going to treat the end result as a control node. But right now, with our local machine being the interim control node, this is our current target. And just as we would normally SSH onto that server with an EC2-user followed by the @ symbol, we want to use that same username and we're going to pass it in as the Ansible user. And then we're going to pass in the private key that we need to SSH onto that target node, right? So in this case, it'll be Ansible _SSH private key file equals .ssh cp class students.pem. Now, we are going to be working with two different key pairs, okay? So I want to keep things as unconfusing as possible. This is the key pair that we created with our instance, right? because we're trying to get onto the EC2 instance right now. That's what we're trying to do. And so if we go to the Terraform for that, we could see that we specified the key name of CP class students for the instance. That's why I'm passing that in. And later, when we set up Git or the GitHub CLI, to be specific, we'll be passing in a second and different key name. Okay. So let's run this right now. Let's see if it works. It has empty section between colons. Where is that? Oh, I see. I see a space after my. Wait, no, that's. I want that space. What's it referring to? Invalid spec colon workspace slash workspace. Oh, yeah. I don't know why I use curly brackets here. They're supposed to be parentheses. So let's try that. And looks like I have some issues with my playbook, so let's troubleshoot that. All right, what's it saying? Did not find the expected dash, so I'm missing a dash. Let's go back to our playbook. Asks, oh, my indentation is bad. So let me move that in one. Let's move these in one more. Let's also double check all these. These also need to be pushed in. And I think the rest is good. So now let's rerun. Okay. No hosts matched. Let's see. No inventory was parsed. Only implicit local host is available. Provided host list is empty. Only local host is available. Note that implicit local host does not match all. That's interesting. Oh, why is it trying to parse workspace along with that? So let me see. So I have my playbook specifying an inventory or specifically a single server. And yeah, that's weird. This looks just like the commands I was running earlier. So what am I overlooking? We are mounting our local.ssh into this SSH directory. We're calling Docker Ansible playbooks control dash. Save this. Those of you running this locally, are you Are you getting anything like this, or are you all able to run it?
I'm confused with where'd you get the Docker file from?
Oh, oh, sorry. I guess did we go over that last week? I thought we did. I asked if a few folks had the Docker file. Well, I think I asked if you all had it either set up locally in a virtual environment or Docker. So if you don't have it um, containerized, that's okay. You can run this from a virtual environment. I'm just using Docker because I happen to have it installed in a container and not locally. But if you need the Docker file, let me copy paste that into the README. Now let's add that to the README. And then okay, I'll put it here. And then that's an example of a command. What am I missing? For those of you that are using um, Ansible within a virtual environment, were you able to get this command to run? I mean, it would basically just be all of this in front of Ansible playbooks if you weren't using Docker. Okay. The host is unreachable. Shoot. Let's see. Why is the host unreachable? Oh, does it have some new IP address now? Okay. So let me replace that. Okay, and all I did to get this command to work was I added a comma to this. I guess it doesn't like that it was missing that comma in the end. So now with my updated IP, let's see if this works. Looks like we are good. Cool. So we have a confirmation message saying that our Ansible version is now 2.15.13. Is anyone not getting something like this?
I'm still working on it.
Okay. So let's give you all a bit of time to catch up there. I'm gonna SSH onto this host, and I'm just gonna confirm that this version of Ansible is correct. So yes, want to connect. I'm gonna run Ansible -- version. And we have a match. Ansible 2.15.13. Okay. So far our playbook is turning out a-okay. I'm going to add a few more things now. Right. Next, we're going to want to copy over our directory structure, right? So on this EC2, because we want to use it eventually as our control node, it's going to need inventory files and playbooks, or at the very least for now, a directory for these things. So locally, I've already got them in this Ansible project directory. So the way that I write my playbook out, I'm just going to point to these directories, and I'm going to copy over what I have locally into the appropriate folder structure on the EC2. I'm going to do project directory on the remote node. And set path to home /EC2 user /Ansible underscore project. Set state to directory. Owner and group will both be EC2 user. And then we'll also specify the permissions on it. So that we can also copy over our inventory and playbook directories. It's going to be very similar. Instead of file, we use copy. And the rest is also very similar. We set a source. And this source is going to be the path inside of the container, which is essentially like a mirror representation of the path on our local machine, right? Because if you're using a Docker container like I am, if you remember our Docker command, we use -v to mount our present working directory into workspace. So we're going to use workspace as our source. And like this is about where your mileage may vary if your folder structures are different, etc. I'm going to set the destination to EC2 user and Ansible project. I don't need to specify inventory at the end here. Otherwise, it will nest the inventory directory under another inventory directory, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to leave it at Ansible project. Again, set the owner and group to EC2 user. I'm going to set the mode to 0755 again. I'm going to make sure we don't have typos. I'm going to copy and paste this entire thing. And just replace inventory with playbooks. Okay.
Quick question. You had to indent DNF one more time, right? That's what the issue was?
Oh, yes. Earlier, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think
Okay.
I got this issue.
Oh, I probably have to fix that in here too, huh? Oh, wait, no. It was just a typo on my screen. Okay. And now let's do another confirmation. So just like how we created an output earlier, we'll do the same again. We're going to create a variable and then we're going to output results of that variable. So verify the copied files. And our command is going to be an ls command because that's what we use to list files in a directory. And it's going to be inside of the Ansible project. We're going to store it under a variable called project_files. And now this last task is going to be outputting that result. Directory contents. And just like earlier, we're going to use built-in.debug. But we're going to show a slightly different way of rendering that output. Earlier, we used message and some string interpolation to show the version, which looks like it has a typo. And now, instead of doing that, we could do something like project file. So we're calling that variable name again, but now we're running the std out method. And that's just another way of getting that log printed. Okay, so let's save that. And let's rerun our command. Okay. So far, we're getting okays on all of our tasks. So we're in a good place. And we see this as being the output of that last task. The std out gave us exactly what we would see if we were to type ls-l on that directory. Cool. All right, where's everyone at?
Lost.
How was that, Jeremy?
I said lost.
Oh, well, let's
I got
switch.
I got the playbook, but
Okay, cool.
mentally lost.
Sure. Let's slow down a bit. Let's break it down a bit. Do you have any what's the first question that comes to mind?
Um, I guess the first question is you're doing the name copies or name this files. Is there a structure kind of similar to the Terraform website with the repositories or whatever they called it?
Yeah,
Where a format to find all this?
yeah, let's see.
I'm assuming like when you put install Ansible,
Mhm.
which phrase is actually making the box install Ansible? Like, is it the name or is it when you just put name Ansible, does it just know? Is that the way to put it or state? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, how does it? I get it with like user data because we're actually inputting the commands that are going to be run in the box, but how and which commands are correlated to what part of the playbook?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like a little less intuitive with Ansible than it is for Terraform because there's a bit of like abstraction going on in between, right? So I totally understand where you're coming from. In this command here, we're saying that we're using install Ansible using pip, right? So we're able to just pass in pip and pass in Ansible and present to pip.
And the name is just that's for us. Or
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
to affect the actual output.
Mhm. But what's unintuitive about it is we then see in the next block, right? We're using command to specify the command that we would type inside of the command line.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We could think of command as kind of like being the keyword to use to say, hey, we just want to run like this random command. We could probably also just write command pip here, but the benefit to using something like DNF or pip as package managers, let's see. Let me find some good documentation on this real quick. Right. I guess the benefit to using things like pip or DNF as opposed to command is there's abstraction happening in between, right? Basically, by using the module, we get access to all of these other parameters and whatnot that the Ansible developers have written into that module, right? So the syntax will be like slightly different from just running command.
Julius, dare I say it's like, sorry about that. Dare I say it's like shorthand?
Yeah. Yeah, go. Yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah. And you want to dive more a little into that idea, that line of thought?
Well, oh no, I was just thinking it's just like you were pointing out, and almost like Jeremy was saying, it's syntax, but it's a truncated syntax, and that syntax has other things kind of tied to it. So when you utilize it in the document, it seems like it's not a full command, but it actually is. Excuse me. And I just wanted to ask a question since I'm already running my mouth, just really quick, just to check my understanding. So we are running playbooks locally, and using those playbooks to install Ansible on an instance. And then we are running playbooks locally to then also install more dependencies on the workers using a playbook locally. And then there's another extraction because you're running it on a Docker container, which means you don't have it installed on your machine.
Exactly. I don't have it on my local machine.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, that second part that you said though, like if
Okay.
you mean like the target nodes by the workers, yes, we
Oh,
could do
yes.
that. But like the end result really is like if this was like a real world scenario, like once we set up the control node, like the remote control node, we want to use that remote control node to install on the target nodes.
Okay. Okay.
Nothing's stopping us from using any other control node, right? Like we could use our local machine still to install on those target nodes. Um, yeah,
Thank you for clearing that up. Thanks. Yeah.
for sure. But part of like what I'm hoping we're doing by like providing all of this additional context is not just like covering best practices, but also kind of like conceptualizing it, right? Because we don't want you to like get
Yeah,
into
for sure.
this we don't want you to like get stuck thinking like there's only one fixed way of doing things, because there rarely is. Okay, so cool. We've got our set of Ansible in a good place. So I'm going to save that again, and let's start on another playbook. So now I'm going to go back to my playbooks directory, and I'm going to make something like setup GitHub CLI. So just like before, we are going to pass in a name. I'll get CLI. And we're also going to transfer our SSH keys. So that way, as soon as we get this set up, we can start running playbooks on the control node to set up onto additional target nodes. So let's, I don't know why it's doing all this. What is this? Oh, my computer is really acting up today. It's being really slow. Okay, let's power through. Let's hope my computer doesn't just self-implode. And let's go ahead and add some more data. Like here, we're going to add all. We're going to add, just like before, we're going to add become. And we're also going to specify some variables here. Okay. So since we're going to be passing in another key, we want to specify where that key is going to come from, right? So it's going to be in our SSH directory because that's where we store all of our keys. And we're going to specify the key name. It's saying this. Can you all see these messages? Yeah.
Yep.
Let me just try to clean this up a bit. I'm gonna close that out. I'm gonna reopen it and hopefully we'll save this time. Okay, I think it's good. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, we're gonna be working with multiple SSH keys. We want to specify the SSH key that we're sending in, but instead of hard coding it, we can use variables to allow us to pass in a different SSH key or file every time, right? So also notice that we're able to nest variables. We're specifying key source here, so we don't actually have to pass in key source. It's key name that we're going to pass in. So let's enter, let's add one more, and it's going to be the destination. This is where we're going to save the key onto the target. So in this case, because we're making EC2s with Amazon 2023, the user directory is always /home /EC2-user. And we're going to toss it inside of SSH. And actually, let's go back to that Docker command for a sec, yeah. We're already using this environment variable, Ansible user equals EC2 user. So we could continue to reuse that. So instead of specifying EC2 user here, we could also just say Ansible underscore user. And then we'll reuse SSH underscore key name. All right, so our variables should be good to go. Now we can write some tasks. And first we're gonna install Git. And again, we're gonna use our package manager, right? So we could try to do this with command : DNF, blah, 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 or we could use the official DNF image because, or module, DNF module because it exists. And if we were to look that up here in the community documentation, you could probably see some context on how to use certain things, right? So right, this tells us that the name is the package specifier, blah, 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 that we would normally use when running DNF. So, right, like to answer your question from earlier, Jeremy, yes, there is documentation similar to the Terraform documentation that will give us more insight or information on these modules. They're definitely not as, well, in my opinion, they're not as Uh, I don't want to say they're not helpful. They are, but there's a lot of information, and I personally like the Terraform documentation a lot better than Ansible's. I just feel like they do a better job organizing the information in a user-friendly way.
Yeah, I think Ansible is a lot more confusing to me than Terraform.
I mean, I agree. I really do think I really do think it is. And part of that might be the flexibility of Ansible. With Terraform, you really just have one file type to worry about, right? Your Terraform file, and then you run like the same two, three, four, five commands over and over again. It's pretty simple and straightforward. With Ansible, you got to worry about inventories, playbooks. You don't even have to use inventories. You don't even have to use playbooks. You could just type commands directly into the Ansible command line, right? So while on one hand, it's great to have a lot of flexibility that Terraform does not really have, it makes the learning curve for Ansible a little more steep. So definitely is more confusing, but I'm going to power through it. Once you use it a few times, you get to contextualize it a bit more through various use cases. You'll get the hang of it just the way you did with Terraform. So we are using DNF, and our documentation tells us that we could use name to pass in the name of the package we want to install. In this case, it's going to be git. Let's read about state real quick. Let's see if we can get some clarity on this. So state allows us to specify whether to install the present, latest, or remove a package using absent. By default, it is none, but in effect, the default action is present. I kind of regret going into this, like that's super confusing. Um, if you're not specifying state, the default would be none, but in effect, the default action is present because if you're trying to install a package, it's going to become present. If that makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, don't sweat it. It doesn't really make sense to me either. But that's the syntax we want to use. We're going to specify present because we want it to be there, right? Okay, so I'm looking at my indentation, just double checking. I just noticed I'm missing a dash here. I'm fix these. And now let's go to our next task. It's gonna be ensuring that our directories exist, right? Because if we don't do this first, we might run into some errors. So we're gonna use the file module to ensure that these directories exist. And so if we look up our file module, no, and that's I think it's command line command. Let's see. I'm looking for a built-in. Built-in.file. This is the page that would give us information on the things that we're passing in, right? So things like path, for example. Um, yep, yeah, self-explanatory, but it's the path to the file being managed, and we could see that it's required, so we can't forget this one. And I think it's the only required. Yeah, only required RAM, but we're going to add some other ones as well, right? So let's say for this, it's going to be home. Again, we're going to use our Ansible user variable. And we're going to search inside of the .ssh directory. And we want to make sure that this is a directory and not a file. And we want to specify the owner as being the EC2 user. So let's go ahead and add owner, same with the group. And you know, when you run something like chmod or chmod, this is what we're also specifying, right? Chmod is short for change mode. We can manually set the mode here as well so that the right permissions exist on these files and that Ansible can continue to interact with them the way that it needs to. Okay, so that's for the SSH directory. Now we can actually copy the files that we need, assuming that this task succeeds. So let's do copy SSH private key to the control node. And we're going to use the copy module, passing in things like the source, which is going to be the SSH key source, the destination, or DEST, which is SSH key DEST. And again, just like before, we want to set the owner, group, and mode. This case, actually, because it's a file and not a directory, we're going to use 0600. Okay, and we can do the exact same thing for our public key. So got one for our privates, got one for public, and we just have to remember that we add a .pub to the public key, because if we go to our SSH directory and run ls, we see that our keys come as pairs, right? With the key by itself and the key with a .pub. Let's also take a sec to talk about modes and owners and groups a bit more. So this is our user, right? In Linux and Unix-based systems, there are users and there are groups, and those get created pretty much like automatically. When you add a new user, it will be added to like a default group. For my local machine, my default group is staff. My default username is this. And when we look at the mode, that's what this represents. It's I don't want to try to go into detail on how to read this right now, but we could, some parts of it are easier to understand than others, right? Like we know that we only have read access here because it's only showing R and not RW. By using 0600, we can add some additional permissions, right? So now we see that ID under RSA underscore 2025 also has W in addition to R. And this is the key that I'm using, by the way. This is the key that I actually have associated with my GitHub account. So that's why I had to run chmod on those. I think these are just old keys that I don't use. I could probably delete, but that's what the mode, user, and groups are referring to. Okay, so now we can add, right, just more logging to confirm that everything is hunky-dory, and we are going to use file along with a path, owner, and group. To ensure that the permissions are correct. So H underscore key destination. And I just realized, oh no, that's good. Never mind. Source destination. We're passing in the destination for the path because we're only concerned about checking for the file that we've just created, right? So we're going to use a lot of the same stuff. It's going to have the same owner, same group, and the same mode. So we could copy paste that, fix our indents, and let's copy this one more time and do the same our public key. So let's save. Okay, before we run this, the way that we did before, let's create one more playbook. And I'm actually just gonna, it's a very simple one. So I'm just gonna open the one that I already have and edit this. So Ansible, project, playbooks, which I control it. And with this parent playbook, we could list out a list of different playbooks that we want to run, right? So if we wanted to create a new target node or sorry, a new control node, and we wanted to have Python, Ansible, and GitHub CLI, we could specify both of our playbooks in this parent playbook. So I think my new one is actually called set-up Ansible and GitHub.cli. So you just follow this format, you just specify name and you import the playbook, and you do that for all the ones that you want. And we use that when we run our command. So either use your long Docker command or use Ansible playbooks. And just to kind of clean this up a bit, because it's just so cluttered, I'm going to open up my custom alias file, and I'm going to make a new alias. I'm going to call it Docker Ansible playbooks, and I'm going to set it to this first part of my command. So this new alias, it's going to call Docker run. It's going to pass in these options. It's going to mount my present working directory to workspace. It's going to pass in an environment variable of host key checking being false. And then it's going to mount my SSH keys. And then it's going to run this specific image. So I'm going to save, I'm going to reload. And now I could just use this command in place of the entire Docker command. So I just reloaded. If I do Docker Ansible playbooks, now I could treat this the way I would if I were just running the Ansible playbooks command, like the original Ansible playbooks command, right? So what I want to pass into this now is the path to my playbook, and that's going to be Ansible project, playbooks, control-init.yaml, and I'm going to pass in the IP address, which I kind of already forgot. Or was it? In one of these tabs. Okay. Should have just pasted it somewhere else. Okay, that should be it. All right, I'm passing in the IP address. I'm going to put in a comma because I specified in my playbooks that I want hosts to be all. So it's looking for a list, I guess. And Now I also want to pass in some environment variables, right? So my Ansible, or yeah, my Ansible user is EC2 dash user. I should not be doing that. EC2 user, and then my SSH key is Ansible underscore SSH underscore private key file. That's .ssh cp class students .pem. All right, remember earlier when I said that we were going to be working with two different sets of key pairs? When you're running multiple playbooks from a parent playbook, you'll want to set the environment variables used by all of them at once in your command, right? So the Ansible playbook does not need this last environment variable, but the GitHub playbook does. So I'm gonna specify it here. Our SSH key name equals ID underscore RSA 2025. And the difference between these two keys, someone tell me what the difference is.
Shot in the dark, but is one used for AWS and the other used for Git?
Yes, yes. Uh, Technically both being used on AWS, except yes, one is specifically for the EC2 instance, right?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Mhm. Yeah, because in our Terraform file, this is what we need to have SSH access to the EC2. But once we get onto our EC2, we also want to be able to git clone repositories from our account, and that's what this is for. And if you all remember, I think we did this last week or the week before or the start of the curriculum. If you go to your settings inside of GitHub and you go to SSH keys, this is what that is referring to. So with this on the EC2, I'll be able to run git clone, git fork, git push, all of that good git stuff. So I'm going to hit enter. Let's see it do its thing. It's starting with our Python and Ansible install from our first playbook. Everything's looking good. And once this finishes running, we should be able to go onto the EC2 and confirm that it has worked. I'm going to close down some of this, some of these. I need this. I think I need this. Okay. Okay. Everything succeeded. Nothing failed. I got 17 OKs. I got 4 changes on my EC2. If I do an LS, there's the Ansible project where the playbooks and whatnot were created. And if we go up one more time. Oh, right. I'm looking for the SSH directory. So I'm going to go up, or no, I'm going to do an LSLA in this directory, and that shows the SSH directory. I'm going to go in there, do an LS, and we have our key pair. Cool. So that is about it. Let me cut the, actually, let's go back to the today's lesson because I had enough time to add the lesson, but I don't think I want you all doing this Docker Compose challenge. Okay. Let's focus on catching up on all of the challenges today. So don't worry about Ansible, Docker Compose. Over the weekend, if the challenge was to write a playbook to set up MySQL, let's have let's keep working at that and on that, and let's have somebody demo that by the end of the night. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna open up breakout rooms and we'll have stand down at 9.